Questions. I'm your host, Ralph Newell, and today we have with us Dr. Cal Reyes from Utah Valley University. Dr. Reyes, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ralph, for having me.
All right. Um, lot to talk about today. Couple different topics I want to get into. But first things first, I was reading in one of your bios somewhere that you are or were faculty advisor to the Hip Hop and Graffiti Club. So I'm curious. This the
Yeah.
World Series is about to start. Um, I want to know who you got. You got Kendrick Lamar and the Dodgers, or Drake and the Blue Jays.
Oh, look, I grew up in San Fernando Valley, right off the 101 freeway, about an hour from Chavez Ravine. This is not even a debate. It's Kendrick Lamar all day, not like us and the Dodgers. So
All right.
I can't wait for it to start. By the time this airs, it'll be over. But yeah, it's about to start tomorrow.
So so you're hoping for a four-game sweep, I'm hearing then.
I'm hoping, but I think it's probably five or six. But I'm hoping for a four-game sweep.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you as well. I grew up a Dodger fan, so
There it is.
just talking with someone about baseball earlier today, and I said I'm going to have to ask you though, see where you are. But anyway, just to begin, can you just sort of tell us about your personal journey into higher ed and how you ended up being where you are? Because I think your story is could be interesting to a lot of people, sort of setting the stage of maybe the work you're doing and why you do it and how you're doing it. Because I think part of the other story, part of your story of being a former college dropout, I think is
Yeah.
integral to this. So,
Sure. Thank you for the question. Look, I grew up in a mixed race home, mixed religious home in Southern
mm,
California. And so I start there because I think it's important, especially later when I talk about my research on intercultural understanding, is that I grew up in a community where I was always kind of in between identities and in between spaces within education. What I mean by that is, I felt like as a graffiti artist, but also as somebody who was an athlete, somebody who I thought I was a bright student, but I didn't really do well in time tests and didn't do well in
mhm,
school in that regard. I Hawaiian, Japanese, Filipino, but growing up with a lot of friends who self-identified as, Latino or Latino and primarily from, Mexican background and in Southern California. And then in a home where politically, religiously, ideologically, there were just some differences, right, that we were constantly navigating. Fast forward to, going to college, trying college out a few times and failing out, not doing well. In fact, after 3 semesters of college, I had a cumulative 0.78 GPA, like not even a 1.0. And that's basically because I passed my art classes because I'm an artist. And so I would take
mhm.
all these classes, I'd pass one art class with a B, and then I'd fail the rest of my classes. Um, and the journey to higher education is like many of us, Ralph, and again, many who you've had even on this podcast, and that is we through mentors and miracles, we have had
Mhm.
doors of opportunity open to us, and we just kind of had to decide whether it was now or never. And for me, these mentors and miracles showed up at a time when I just thought, okay, is there an entry point to this college life in terms of work? I had completed a degree in graphic design because of my art background through, again, mentors and advisors who got me into cultural dancing and helped me stay in college in that way. But then after working as a designer for a little bit, I just thought somebody said, "What would bring you joy like on a daily basis?" And I said, "I don't know. I'd love to go when I would go dance in these perform these cultural dances. These young kids would come up to me and be like, 'I want to go to college.'" And I'm like, and so I would give them these pep talks. Well, come to find out, there's these programs like Trio Upward Bound and Talent Search and Gear Up, these federal programs to help low socioeconomic status communities and first generation students. And it was then in 2003 where I just thought I think I want to do that for the rest of my life. And so my very first job at what was then called Utah Valley State College before it became a university in 2008 was as a trio advisor for Upward Bound. And I would go around to communities that came from first gen, low socioeconomic status backgrounds. And I would literally just visit students in their homes and at school and try to motivate them to go to college. And 22 years later, 8 jobs later, 2 degrees later, I am where I
Okay.
am through more miracles and more mentors and more, opportunities. And so, for me, the journey has been because I've wanted to navigate where I fit, where I found my space,
Hmm.
that's what I wanted to dedicate my career to is helping students become authors of their own stories. And for me, whether it's through graffiti art or slam poetry or um, hip hop or
Right.
some other avenue to become an author of their story, it matters to me that these students feel like somebody's in their corner.
Thank you. I like that story, and you touched on a number of things that I wanted to touch on in our conversation. Specifically the trio and gear up programs. Some have been chopped. Some are proposed to be chopped. Some
Right,
will be chopped.
right.
You know, the timing of me, hearing about the work that you're doing was serendipitous. It's great timing because of the the elephant in the room, the anti-DEI fervor that's out there, all the programs being cut and things like that. You have an approach that you're looking at that and proposing that uh, as you say, the lenses of humanity. So I do some training where we look at people and work with people that are from different backgrounds. And
Mhm.
ironically, there's another book called The 10 Lenses. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Dr.
Mhm.
Mark Williams wrote, but I use it in our trainings a lot. And it is, we see the world through how we see it, and then But anyway, getting into all that, I won't get into what he's doing, but really caught my eye reading with the work that you were doing because I saw the similarities there. But I do want to talk a little bit about your book, "The Lenses of Humanity: How Reflection, Connection, and Empathy Can Heal Our World." So, your book is described as an important work of human and cultural understanding. So, first of all, what prompted you to write this book, and
Yeah.
what gaps were you hoping to address?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Really, selfishly, it's been my own kind of personal journey that prompted me to
Hmm.
write this book, right? As somebody who is, again, mixed race, my cultural background, and then my partner, my wife, Michelle, is from the Navajo Nation. So now you mix in Native American indigenous communities. And so
Wow.
my children are Hawaiian, Japanese, Filipino, and Navajo. And we just are finding out even more recently, part German too. Like there's just these
Hmm.
connections. It became a book where over the course of my career at the university, I found myself even before this past wave of anti-DEI sentiment,
Right.
this work has ebbed and flowed for generations, right?
Hmm.
For decades. And I think what's been interesting is to find the entry points where people don't throw up the ideological wall and stop the conversation. For me, when I became UVU's first chief inclusion officer, right, back in
Hmm.
2014, first ever, in a predominantly, I don't say this disparagingly, I'm just saying this from a political lens, in a
Right.
predominantly red state, in a predominantly red county,
Hmm.
where we're doing this work. I didn't want the work that we were doing, meaning, and let me just frame it this way, focused on students,
Hmm. Hmm.
focused on helping them where they are, right? Meeting them where they are and understanding their holistic needs. I didn't want somebody to politicize that, right?
Right.
And so as we were starting to do this work, I was definitely hearing the chatter of, oh, it's getting too woke or it's becoming too much like it's the pendulum is swinging too far. And I found myself saying, no, 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 hold on. And as I would talk to individuals, even legislators, people of influence in the community who maybe had a problem with one of the initiatives that we were doing or one of the centers that we were opening, I, I didn't want to fight fire with fire. I wanted to sit down and just say, let's talk. Let's actually talk about why you have such an issue with us showing up for our students in this way. And I found that if I could ground this work not in some political terminology, but in a very human-based storytelling dimension, I found an openness. I found support, even from those who initially were ideologically, opposed to what we were doing. And what I mean by that is I would almost ask almost every time it became a habit of mine when somebody would want to engage in, hey, I don't agree with what's happening at the university. I think it's getting too liberal or whatever. We would sit down and I would say, can we just talk about you and your family for a moment? What would you want for your children? Like, independent of their background, identity,
Hmm.
preparation, just at a core human level, what do you want for your child, your niece, your nephew, your grandchild? And oh my goodness, Ralph, every time it was like, I want them to be safe.
Right.
I want them to be seen and heard and validated. I want them to be empowered. I want them to like they were all these desires that were so human. And it was and so I said, amazing. Me too. Like I want that for
Hmm.
my children too. So
Right.
here's can I propose to you what we're trying to do at the university?
Okay.
What we're trying to do at the university is actually pay attention to what safety means to your child and to what safety means to my child.
Hmm.
What validation means to your child and what validation means to my child. What helping them in their nuance and their uniqueness. And then I would say, do you have more than one child? And they're like, yeah. And I said, do you want them to be treated all the exact same way? Or should we differentiate based on what they actually need? One of your
Hmm.
children might need more support here. Another one might have mental health support. Another one might just need to be let go and they just got to do their thing. But wouldn't you agree that we should differentiate based on what they need? And then they were like, yeah, but, and I'm like, well, okay.
Right.
That's what we want at the very base human level for our own kin, our own blood, our own children. Then why is it such a radical idea that I want that for every student that walks the halls at Utah Valley University?
Hmm. Hmm.
Truly, like authentically, right? And so the book, this book that was, published a year ago, was a 5, 6 year research and book project around this idea to say, when I was invited to consult nationally on equity issues, inclusive leadership, whatever it might be, I found myself always positioning the work as this is not some agenda. This is not some liberal agenda. This is a humanity-based agenda. I mean, this is a humanity-based effort and work. And and so when I started there, I found that it just was received better. And not that I'm trying to sanitize it in some way where I'm like not afraid to talk about the real issues, or sorry, that I'm afraid to talk about the real issues. I'm happy to address policy. I'm happy to address what's happening on the ground with data in terms of who's has access and who doesn't. But
Hmm.
remember, if the goal is don't stop the conversation, how do you keep people involved in the conversation? Then the very premise of what we're trying to do here is I'm trying to reframe to a humanity-based effort. And so the four lenses of humanity that I kind of introduce as a framework is really an ongoing invitation for us individually and us organizationally to
Hmm.
say, okay, enough with all the names of equity and diversity and all the names that are becoming so politicized. Can we just focus on our roles as educators is to dignify the human experience by providing educational opportunity, right? And can we do so in a way that is research based and is helpful? So that's kind of the evolution of it. And I just flew back from Boston last week, and the two universities I spoke there, they just said, "Gosh, this is such a refreshing approach to the very same topics we've been trying to get through, but we've been blocked at every turn because certain words are just blocked right now."
Glad you say what you said about, the schools in Boston, if you will. So if we all are on the same page of satisfying the needs and meeting students where they are, because at the end of the day, it is ultimately about the student success. Um, but we have these programs that have, to your point, that data and research has pointed out that this group needs this and this group needs that. I mean, that's why we had the trio programs and gear up programs and
Exactly.
things like that. So when you talk to that person who sees that as in general, a woke policy, or now in a lot of states, it is legislated against. How do you have that conversation? Can you walk us through, how your concept of this translate into action? If you can no longer have, the club on your campus for, indigenous students, what's the next step? I mean, how are you bridging that gap? How does that look?
But by the way, that question you just asked is the question of
Right.
our day. it's the higher ed, it's the public ed, it's the sort of public domain question of, okay, so it's nice to think through, oh, well, let's just wait till policies change.
Hmm.
But in the meantime, tomorrow we go back to the office, we go back to work. What do we do tomorrow, right? And what I'm about to share is might be unsatisfactory to the listeners at some level
Hmm.
because it's not a one size fits all.
Understood.
For me, we all there are people much brighter than me that can jump on and talk about tools and ways to reframe and to re-talk about things on your campus. For me, the reason why I come back to the four lenses of humanity is because for me it starts with the disposition and the kind of what I would call the heart of the institution. So let me explain what I mean by that, because then I'll then actually answer the question directly.
Yeah.
Back when I was teaching, I'm a tenured professor in the School of Education, and when I would teach my multicultural understanding class to my students, and we'd get to about week two or week three, and then they would say, Kyle or Dr. Reyes, I would always say, just call me Kyle. Kyle, we get it. We've got to be inclusive in the classroom. Just tell us what to do already. Like, why are we going through all these personal reflection exercises? And I said, and I would tell them, if you think you get it, then you don't get it right now. Meaning, if you just want to go to the actions, then you haven't done enough work to understand why we're doing the actions. And
Hmm.
and so for me, there's this work that we have to do both individually and organizationally to constantly ask ourselves that why question. And so now let me answer the question.
Hmm.
If I'm speaking to a group, whether it's faculty, whether it's student affairs or some staff group that's across a campus, and they're saying symbolically, we can't even have signage, we can't have symbols, we can't have anything, we can't have names of buildings, we can't have any of this stuff. And then I say, but have you developed a culture where the students still know that they have an advocate, that they can bring their ideas, and that they are going to get support? And and if you have that culture, that institutional culture, and usually when I talk to student affairs groups across the nation or whatever, they'll say, "Oh no, no, yeah, yeah, of course, they know that. We that's what we are." And I said, then keep doing the work. If you're talking about how do you frame this for legislators to get funding or donors to get funding, because now I'm a VP of advancement, right? I'm
Right.
over all the fundraising efforts for the university with an amazing team. How do you position this work in a way that garners support? Because there's two questions here. One is tomorrow, how do I show up for my students? And for me, it's like show up as you've always shown up for your students. Like
Hmm.
you have to be solid here and resilient here to then be able to show that and model that for the students. I can't tell you at University X, Y, or Z what events or flags or policies you can or can't do in that context. But students, what I love about students at almost any age,
Hmm.
they can perceive care and they know authentic care when they see it. They know it. And and so there's that side of it. And then there's the fundraising policy side of it of how do we try to continue to educate folks. And so here's one tool that I'll offer as
Hmm.
an approach. When I'm talking to folks who were very much wanting to perhaps get rid of identity-based centers or services because, in their view of fairness, in their view of equality, it didn't match their definition of fairness, right? And so
Hmm.
we would sit there and we would talk through, and then I would ask them questions like, um, uh, do you have anybody in your family that's first generation? And inevitably they do. Somebody's got. Do you have anybody in your family that's served in the military? And inevitably, they do. Somewhere in their family,
Right.
somebody. And so I would talk about the importance of our military center at the university, right? Which is still allowed. And I would say our Veteran Success Center, which is now called MASH, the Military Affiliated Student Hub, our Veteran Success Center, isn't it amazing that any military connected student and family member could go to that office and know that the person that they're looking at across the counter gets them at a
Hmm.
very deep level because they understand what it's like to be a part of a military family. Isn't that amazing? And these folks would be like, yes, that's so amazing. That's what I love about UVU. And
Hmm.
then I would say, isn't it amazing that we have a first generation center because UVU has 41% of our students are first in their families to pursue a bachelor's degree. That's like 19,000 of our students.
Hmm. Hmm.
Process that for a second, right? And then so they'll say, yeah, no, that's amazing. That's what I love about UVU. And I'm like, isn't it amazing that at our first gen center, everybody that works at the first gen center, Student Success Center, is first gen themselves. They were
Right.
first gen. So when a student comes to them, they can just know, they feel that that person, without saying anything, they just get me. They know my doubts, my fears, my worries, and all that stuff. Isn't that amazing? And these folks would be like, yeah, that's remarkable. That's amazing. And then I would talk about international students, and I would talk about a number of populations that are still allowable, right?
Hmm.
And then I would say, is it in the realm of the possible that other groups would need the similar type of feeling that when they
Hmm.
come to a center or a university, that they just can feel like, oh, not just, I feel that the university gets me because this one person gets me, or this one
Hmm.
center or service or faculty member gets me, right? And so I found that if I can build those bridges with some of these external partners and really frame for them, again, this is not just some radical agenda. This is me actually trying to help your military connected family member and your
Hmm.
first gen family member and your international student that you had as part of a study abroad or whatever it might be, an exchange. And so those are just some example. One is your disposition, developing the heart, keep showing up. The other one is keep the conversation going with the partners that fund the areas. And again, you and I could probably spend another 2 hours talking about practices in the classroom and things, but
Right.
I'll stop there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I know it's cliche. That's a lot to unpack. And I'm not saying there are pitfalls there because that's not what I'm saying at all. But when I look at um, those groups, those are definitely easy groups. Um, when I say easy groups, I mean those are groups, first generation students, when you put in all that way, international students, military. Nobody wants to pick at those people. But if you say, um, and I'm thinking of it as an African American,
Sure,
when I
sure.
went to a PWI, I maybe didn't feel welcome there. Not because I wasn't welcome there, maybe, and I'm sure I was welcome, but maybe it was because I hear over here, oh, here's the Black Student Organization. Um, I definitely should be welcome there. You know what I mean? It's the biggest common denominator for me, so to speak. So I guess what I'm getting at is I hear what you're saying. It's very holistic in some regards. You can fit more people under those umbrellas, but when you get into affinity groups at a lower level, how does that work? Or
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
or, or do you not have those?
Well, no, no, we did. We did until legislation forced us to not.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. So that that's the nuts there of like, how can you bridge that work and still have that center where that Pacific Islander student or that African American student, the Latino student feels they have a home base of support.
So I think it goes to training. I mean, look,
Mhm.
frontline staff training and faculty training and those things, meaning you just have to be explicit about, okay, let's not pretend like these things did like that we didn't lose something valuable here. We did.
Yeah.
So what I was trying to get at was if you're a financial aid advisor, right? Or
Mhm.
and you're what I don't want you to think about is, well, I can't refer this student anymore to this particular identity-based center, so I just don't
Right.
know what to do. Like, no, it's like, no, keep doing what you've been doing and caring for students no matter what.
Right.
And there are ways for us to continue to communicate. I see you, right?
Right.
Whether through its events and celebrations or those things. What I'm careful about, Ralph, is when you don't have a position designation, right? The director of the Black Excellence Center,
Right.
director of the Women's Success Center or LGBT or whatever it might be.
Hmm.
And then you say to somebody else, anybody that's from a marginalized background, it's now your work to go just above and beyond your job. You just got to watch out for everybody that's part of, in my case,
Hmm.
Asian Pacific Islander
Hmm.
identities. It's once again, it's putting sometimes the work on the folks that are, we're just flat out,
Right, right.
alone in some of that in some of that work. So for me, it's cross training.
Hmm.
It's being explicit about why it matters that we're cross training and that it's a collective ownership. That
Right.
before, whereas you had a center, now we are the center. And so,
Hmm.
what does that look like for us? And just call it out. Like,
Yeah.
this means that we all have to do our own work, whether it's offered by the university or we take
Hmm.
the training on our own. And
Right.
I talk about that in the second lens of context lens
Hmm.
development of the humanity lens is we have a responsibility if we want to lead from a humanity driven sort of purview and perspective,
Hmm.
got to do the work ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that means that we take advantage of the trainings inside the organization. We take advantage of webinars and podcasts and trainings and all these things outside the organization so that we can go do our own heavy lifting and be prepared to address students. It's hard to champion students if we really don't get students' identities and backgrounds and languages and those things. And so if somebody goes, oh well, I don't feel equipped to help them because I don't know what it's like,
Hmm.
hey, then go do the work. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not first gen. My parents both went to college, and over the years I've developed a certain sensitivity and a certain language understanding and a certain understanding, but it took hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations with first gen students and doing my own research and reading books about the first gen experience. And so for me, it's a lot of us doing that cross training.
Too much time ago, but one more question, sort of, and I definitely encourage the audience to read the book. A nugget to encourage people to check it out. For someone who's unsure of themselves, how can they have that conversation with the quote unquote other side and without it becoming contentious? How do you set that stage?
Let me put it in two buckets. The lenses, they're not sequential. They're kind of,
Hmm.
you're always working on them. But the very first lens of the inner lens is first unpacking how and why we view the world the way we do. So it's doing our own work to check our own like reasons why. Why do I react to that political stance? Why do I view the world the way I do? But then
Hmm.
we get to these other two lenses that are companion lenses. They're critical. One is the context lens, and
Hmm.
that's inviting people to go and broaden your scope of understanding with the larger world around you and engaging with diverse communities through, right, exposure and
Hmm.
education, engagement, immersion, and doing so in a way from a learning disposition. Like I'm here to learn, right? The
Hmm.
goal is not consensus every time. I don't want everybody to feel like they have to agree on every issue. The goal is understanding. And so then if you go and do the work of context development, I've got to just go get more context about the populations, communities, individuals that I don't know about.
Hmm.
Then what happens naturally is we start to reframe in our own minds, right? Our own minds don't fall victim to societal sort of bumper stickers about these very populations. And so we actually become much better critical consumers of navigating society, right? Different populations. But then here we go. The vital piece of the interpersonal relationship
Hmm.
and engaging across lines of ideological and political difference is in the empathy lens development. And I focus on four practices, tools, exercises that we can engage in. And again, I won't go into depth in all of them, but I'll just name them quickly here.
Hmm.
That we need to develop a greater sense of cultural humility, the belief that we actually can learn from somebody, even if we don't agree with them at the end of the day, we can
Hmm.
still learn from them. Courageous empathy, which means I can still empathize from a place of pain where somebody else might be reacting in their way to this topic, this issue, this situation. Genuine inquiry, one of the things I've found to be the most helpful when de-escalating something that could be somewhat incendiary, right, in a staff meeting and whatever, is to just ask more questions of genuine curiosity. I
Hmm.
that Somebody says something and I might say, I'm not going to ignore it, but I might say, I'm not sure you that landed how you thought that landed. It's hitting me a
Hmm.
certain way. Can you explain more about what you meant by X, Y, or Z, right? It's genuine questions to kind of unpack that live. And then the fourth one is humanizing words and language. Words matter, right?
Yeah.
Identities matter, and advocacy matters. And so when we talk about developing the empathy lens, it's not a lens of like weakness or oh, somehow have to just empathize with everybody. What you're saying is if I start from a place of learning and seeking to understand, then I don't automatically position someone else as just the complete enemy or demonize them. It
Hmm.
opens the door for me to say, can we continue the conversation? But we have to assess whether it's going to be a healthy exchange or not.
Right.
If we
Right.
start to engage across lines of difference and it's reciprocated with, or it's met with hostility, it's met
Right.
with shouting, or it's met with like bullying, then that's not a healthy exchange, and we can opt out of that toxicity, right? And at that moment, it's like no one's going to grow at all because we just stay into our sort of our ideological echo chambers. But I think if we can practice some of this work of cultural humility, courageous empathy, genuine inquiry, and then utilizing humanizing words, um,
Hmm.
I think we can get somewhere with that. And again, more exercises are in the book and stuff.
In a lot of cases, whether people want to or not, there is going to have to be a shift. Um, because there is a shift away from, identity based work. So you've been working on this and you've been making the shift to this category, I mean, to this humanity centered type of framework. What have been the biggest challenges to doing that?
It goes back to what you just said earlier, Ralph, about
Hmm.
when you make it so holistic, you lose something in the uniqueness of each group and
Hmm.
and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, everything's inclusive, it's humanity, but do you still see me? Do you
Hmm.
feel,
Hmm.
where did I get lost in the mix of your efforts, Kyle, with it? And it's a fair critique. It's a fair challenge that I've given myself. I'm over here debating myself on these very issues. I
Hmm.
think I think it goes back to if I'm really trying to overcome the biggest challenge being, can people take seriously the humanity-based work approach? Still, it creates a lane for the work to get done
Right.
without more people just coming in and saying, oh, shut that down, shut that down, shut that down. At least it becomes this space where we can start to do the work that we know needs to get done and then remind people of the richness of goodness of that diversity and engagement and that you start to expand that lane a little bit because people are having a good experience with the idea of, huh, I'm actually learning. Before, Kyle, you used to be shouting at me. Now you're telling me you're looking to understand. It's opened up my heart, hopefully, to understand.
Hmm.
Now I'm seeing your argument and I'm seeing your point of view, and I'm open to it a little bit more. I have just been tracking, though, the moment we go and we fight fire with fire. And by the way, make no mistake, part of one of the lenses is advocacy, and
Hmm.
there's a time to shout, there's a time to march, there's a time to. But if I look on a day-to-day basis in higher education, I have not seen that when you push back that anybody changes, that anybody
Hmm.
actually starts to understand the core of the issue.
Right.
And the core of the issue being if I'm a Hawaiian, Filipino, Japanese college student, I want you to see me in that,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And and so I'm trying to say, do you have we created enough space and a lane for you to even get to the point where you could even see that, or have you already thrown that out with this anti-DEI stuff?
Right.
Because
Right.
anything that screams culture, I'm just going to throw out, and I'm just like, stop. That's let's get back to can I just introduce to you a different possibility? And the reason why I think it's of merit is because I haven't been doing this work in the heart of LA or the
Hmm.
heart of, Chicago or New York or some of these areas. I've been trying to be authentic about doing this work in an area that has been, not traditionally um, for all this, this type of diversity work. And I've seen some movement happen. I've seen the community donate money and rally around the university once they
Right.
got it, once they got it, once
Yeah.
they realized, oh my gosh, I thought they were doing this. Kyle just explained it to me. Now I can get behind this. And that's part of the point.
There's a lot of that, just not really knowing what these people are doing on campus and what these centers are for and what the work is. But that's another whole nother level of education. You said earlier, you were doing this research and looking at this even before that legislation happened, right? Now that it's there for real in Utah, was it House Bill 261
Correct.
passed or went into effect July of last year? How has that changed, or has it changed anything in your approach and what you've been doing prior and now post?
Yeah, and again, right, knowing that this is a broad public podcast that is
Hmm.
accessible by anybody, including,
Right.
some of our friends in the legislature who both fund the university, right,
Hmm.
and are part of this particular bill. I'm not going to lie and say that it hasn't impacted us. It's definitely given to all the higher ed institutions a bit of a chilling effect to say, okay, this is. Whereas we had some clear lanes of support for students before,
Hmm.
we have to just let's broaden this and let's really open up like, well, let's figure out what it is that the legislators that passed this bill were trying to accomplish and say, can we still meet the needs of what the core function of our job is in helping students be dignified in their college experience, feel seen, heard, and safe, have mentors, have a support team, and the other thing I would say in that's been look, I don't want to necessarily say it's a silver lining in this regard because it has been tough.
Hmm.
And I've spoken with colleagues in other states where similar legislation is passed. But one of the things then, and I would say is a ray of hope. I don't know if I can
Hmm.
say that is as I've talked to students, like one-on-one with students, and we've just been, unpacking their own emotions around some of this work. They would say things like, Kyle, you spent all these years trying to build up some of these. Like, how does it feel to have this all go in? I'm just like, it's
Right.
not, it doesn't feel great. But then we get into a conversation, and they said, what's this making me realize is once I graduate from UVU and I'm out there in this big world, not every one of my organizations is going to have a center for me, right? Not every one of the
True.
organizations is going to have a support staff that's as caring right here. And they said something, some of my students said something profound. They go, I know we call these spaces safe spaces and brave spaces and whatnot. They go, it was never our intention to just go to these centers and stay there. There was always it was a recharging
Right.
of our
Absolutely.
of our cultural batteries to say, hey, sometimes it's so hard to navigate a world that's just not my culture, my background, my smelly
Hmm.
foods, my music, my whatever.
Right.
I just need to go recharge. And then you know what? I'm fine to go back out into this world where I just kind of have to be on my own and navigate this. And frankly, that's the message that I'm starting to share with some of our folks is to say,
Hmm.
what's been done is done. We are going to move forward with our students. We're going to serve them. And but as I start to still try to work on this, these were never intended, right, in the to be inequitable,
Right.
services. This was the attempt to create these back when we did was every effort to say the university sees historical data
Right.
of student success. The university is committed to differentiating, just like I talked to you about your own children, right? You want
Hmm.
is committed to differentiating based on what students need. And according to the historical data in America and in the state of Utah and in the whatever region or county or whatever, there have been populations that have not had access. And
Hmm.
so we start to bring it back around to just, hey, can you take a look at this data? Can you look at that? That's where our premise was. It was never to silence an audio, one population to lift another. If I really didn't think we could make a difference, I would have left a long time ago, right? I think we can move the needle in understanding, even in communities where it feels like every time I think we're making progress, there's been a pushback. It really has been a test of resilience for a lot of us around the
Hmm.
things that we're committed to. For me, DEI scholar, DEI trainer, I'm like, look, you can call me whatever you want, but I'm a humanity-based educator. And so I'm going to label myself
Right.
to take ownership and reclaim what the work I do is. And that is, I'm going to advocate that your child and your child and your child be taken care of based on what they need when they come through our hallways.
A lot of our readers, I'll say, or people who visit the site, or people that work in higher ed are indirectly or directly have benefited from programs like Trio, right? I mean, there's definitely a large audience. What do you think is going to happen? Like those students that came through that lane, if it's no longer there, what do you think the outcomes are going to be, or how is it going to adjust?
Yeah, I am a big proponent of these programs that have looked
Mm-hmm.
at communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
From first gen and low income, low socioeconomic backgrounds and have provided support and funding because I just have too many stories of lives literally being changed and generations being transformed when it comes to jobs, I mean, college attainment, socioeconomic outlook, those things. I think I can't predict. I mean, I can only hope
Mm-hmm.
right now, and we
Right.
can all write to our legislators and those things. But I don't know at the end of the day just how much funding will be cut. We're already seeing the cuts to some of these federal programs. Um, Here's why it's a tough question to answer, Ralph.
Mm-hmm.
I think the real answer is that it will have a dramatic impact and negative effect on access to higher education for some of our most vulnerable populations in our nation. The reason why I say it's tough to answer, though, is I have been over the years, I have been really heartened by so many educators I've come across who said, "Hey, if this particular grant gets funded, we'll figure out another way to help. If this thing gets cut, we'll figure out another way to help." What's so daunting about this one is just its vastness and its reach
Mm-hmm.
across the nation. And our university, we host the statewide one of the statewide grants, and so it becomes something where it's like we're really trying to be a part of the idea that a rising tide raises all boats.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to be given the resources to have us go address the most vulnerable populations, because if we do not, right, then we see what happens to some of our other programs, and the financial strains that might hit in a different way on the nation. And so part of this is going back to, are we committed or are we not to helping dignify and the human beings that are in our communities, that they can go be empowered through education and that they can go make something of themselves. And so I think, depending on how drastic the cuts are, look, every program that gets cut, there's going to be a dramatic immediate impact. I just wonder if local businesses, if others are going to step up and say, you know what, we actually don't agree with this, and we'd like to rally to see if we can supplement in some way and still have this type of programming that works. The data is clear. It works. Trio works. Gear Up
Mm-hmm.
works. And so I just think that we need to have continually tell that story and continually push against that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my hope is the numbers don't change. You know what I
Ah,
mean? And businesses don't have to rise up because we find another way. But optimism is not there. I'll just say that.
yeah.
I definitely applaud you for, it sounds like you're keeping the momentum and all that. I mean, what advice would you give to your colleagues out there that are bumping their heads against the wall and not knowing what to do?
It's so tough. I recognize certain privileges that I hold, and I want to be very careful that I just don't have some sort of like, oh, here's what I do. And then everybody's like, yeah, Kyle, you have no idea what it's like over here in our organization, in our state, in our community, whatever it might be. So
Right.
I'll just say I have advised some colleagues who have struggled with this and have lost the not the passion, but have lost the optimism that they can make a difference in the way they want to.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, I've said then maybe it is time to step away, right? For you.
Right, right,
Because if your heart's not in it, again, for me, it's like whatever we can do for our students. So if my colleague who I love says I just don't have it in me anymore, maybe it's
hmm
time to go switch, then I'm like, okay. But then there's many that I've advised that's just said, when we signed up for this work, with this work of education. And I don't
hmm
care because whether it's K-12, it's higher ed. First of all, none of us opted into this for the money. None of us. And when we signed up for it, we knew at some level that this is an uphill battle to provide equitable educational opportunities for the masses. And so this is yet another wave, right? If you're talking about swimming in the ocean, the waves just keep coming and you feel like I'm just tired. I can't swim against the current anymore. And it's like, okay, well, then let's just keep holding on to each other. I sometimes have to join some of these national board meetings that I'm a part of and just say, we're not even going to get business done. We just need to know that we see each other today and that we're going to keep showing up together and that my colleague in Oakland and my colleague in Chicago, and that we're still going to show up tomorrow because this is the work we signed up for. And so everybody's got to make that decision. But for those that are feel like they can go another day, let's go
hmm
another day. We got this. There have been days in my 22 years where I have said, gosh, I just don't know if it's even making any difference. And then I'll get just a student interaction.
hmm
It's
hmm
like, were it not for you speaking up, were it not for this, were it not for this, I wouldn't be here. I know that sounds a little maybe too sunshiny for some, but I just don't know the alternative because I don't want to give in
Right,
to this wave. I can't stop swimming against, we've got to at some point. Now I can rest on some like paddleboard,
right, right.
but then I got to get back to working. And so I'll leave that there. I just appreciate you providing this platform for so many of us to tell our story on this matter.
Two last things to talk about. I just really sort of thought of this one because right now, you are the university advancement officer, so you're not directly in student affairs or multicultural affairs. How can other offices on campuses be allies for this work? Do you have any insight
Yeah.
into that?
Yeah, and that's where I just even want to reframe that premise. Meaning,
hmm
for so long, when I was VP of Student Affairs for 5 years, everybody across campus was like, "Oh, all that stuff is in Kyle's division."
Right, right.
Like that's, Kyle's got the center for this, and he's got the center for that, and everything. Okay. When I switched over, per the president's request, switched over to institutional advancement to lead our fundraising effort and our first ever
hmm
comprehensive fundraising campaign, I thought to myself, okay, this is a clash of my worlds here. Like I
hmm
doing all this work and now you want me to go do what? Like I to go and fundraise and go and have these lunches and banquets and all these things, right? And do the advancement world. One of the reframes I had to do was when I went over to the Division of Institutional Advancement, I said, by the way, you all know me. I've been here on campus for a while. You know what I bring to the table. The lenses I bring to the table, whether it was student affairs, I bring those same lenses to fundraising.
hmm
And so we've been able to fundraise for $15 million dollars for a first gen initiative. We fundraised $15 million dollars for that, right? We've been able to fundraise for more access scholarships. We can't have identity-based scholarships, right? And then I understand legally on some of these things, but access scholarships, an
hmm
emergency fund for the care hub, which is basic needs and securities, and food stipends, and all these things that really are there to support our students. We get to go tell that story as fundraisers now and to
Okay.
tell the community you are lifting lives, you're saving lives. But to your question about how can other departments across campus become allies to this work, that's where I say if I'm a financial aid advisor, but that my core responsibility is not to do that multicultural stuff over there, that's for my colleague,
hmm
already lost. If I work in athletics and I'm like, oh, shoot, I don't know how to help the student athlete, let me send them over to that center, we've already lost.
hmm
And so for me, it's reframing that like the goal is not for me in another division to be an ally to the work. The goal is for me to bring that lens of that work to my division. It's to bring the work in-house uh, to my class, to my department, to my area, because then it's not like, oh, gosh, if they just would have worked harder over there in that one center, our success rates of population X would have been better. And I'm like, no, 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 no. We all had that responsibility for population X. And
Right, right.
so that's where I would start is that, and that goes back to the training, right? That goes back to more workshops, and again, even trainings across the nation are being canceled. Like you're not
Hmm.
allowed to have DEI trainings in certain things. So guess what? Like for me, it's not a DEI training. It's a student success, student support training. That's what it is. It's how do we authentically support all of our students? And guess what? We're going to teach you how to do it for different types of students.
I think a lot of people did not know who Utah Valley University was until recently. Now I did know. I'll raise my hand and say I knew knew about you guys for years. But as you know, everyone know the tragic killing of Charlie Kirk on your campus. The approach that you've had of the humanistic centered approach. How did that help the university deal with the tragedy?
I'll say this. I don't pretend that everybody across the university has adopted,
Right, right,
as
understood.
a framework, but I'll tell you this. And there's certain things we can go into, but there's certain things I frankly can't go into
Understood.
current circumstances. But I'll say this, as you can imagine, just the polarized nature of this tragedy, and it is a tragedy. And I posted on my LinkedIn post shortly after the tragic killing of Charlie Kirk. I posted that human life was lost on our campus,
Hmm.
and we are mourning the loss of human life. Now, again, I don't want to get into this thing at a moment of healing to get into this thing about all the debate about what Charlie stood for and all these things. That's for out there for right now. For us at the
Hmm.
university, the focus, and this is authentic, and it was authentic from like the minute. The focus was to stabilize our students and our employees by
Hmm.
caring for their health and wellness and making sure that they could feel safe, and all of our actions that's been documented now on some various outlets, news outlets and stuff, was with the goal of giving space for our students and our employees, but then to start to bring them back in and layer them back into the experience because we recognize their humanity. We recognize that they are navigating this. We are navigating this tragedy together. And so then we brought students back. It was very intentional to have care stations and therapy animals and flexible class schedules to kind of get back
Hmm.
and acclimated. And so I think I feel actually pretty proud of the sincerity with which we were trying to in all of our meetings and everything, trying to make sure that we were paying attention to the holistic student and employee and community member that was affected by the tragedy.
Out of a tragedy, you hope good comes of it. And I was actually thinking, gosh, this humanistic approach that you're talking about and working on your campus, that it actually could and should have helped after this tragedy, and maybe even more people will be open to this approach. To have that dialogue. I really appreciate your time and the insights that you provided to the audience. I really enjoyed the conversation. Just one last thing, what is your hope, now moving forward with the current landscape for the trajectory of student success?
I'll start with where I think we're going to go. The realist in me thinks that there's going to continue to be an increase in national vitriol and politicization of education and these policies at state levels and at national levels. I just think there seems to be momentum, for lack of a better term, around some of this movement. And so I think there's part of that is just expecting to just kind of steel oneself to say, okay, how do we continue? How do we prepare to continue to focus on students under these new environments, under these new climates? Here's my hope, and that's why I want to end on a hopeful note.
Hmm.
My hope is that, and again, better angels can prevail for in terms of us saying and more people realizing that some of the kind of extreme treatments here is just not a humanity focused approach in any regard, and that we can find enough level-headed conversations around the issues to where um, uh, we can have some folks speak some truth to power around the unintended and intended consequences that are going to be negative on our community and society, um, especially around the fact that I'm a believer in education. I'm a believer in higher education. I'm a believer in public higher education. And I mean, again, all you have to do is track the countries that invest in education
Yeah.
and the difference between those that invest in it and those who have an antagonistic view towards higher education. And so I do have hope that we can get back to some sense um, of ability to bring the focus back to student
Hmm.
success, and not be caught up in the politics of the stuff out here in society, and
Hmm.
really understand how we get students to credentials and degrees and to empowerment of their lives. And if I ever lost hope, I should step away.
Yeah.
Because I keep showing up, that means that I think we can make a difference every time we show up.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Reyes. I
Thank
appreciate your
you.
time.
Thank you.